Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. As you may know, I've had a set of Army Painter Speedpaints in my possession for coming up to a week now. My intention with them was to create a series of videos simply painting up my copy of Cursed City. I thought seeing the paint in action in a series of real life applications rather than running a series of contrived experiments would be the best way to show what you could do with them. However, the same question and concerns regarding the reactivation of the paint keeps cropping up, so I thought it might help to have one video on the channel that I could point people to that shows my thoughts on the issue. First of all, if you aren't aware, the Speedpaints formulation allows for reactivation. Basically, if you start applying paint on top of Speedpaints, it can reactivate the previous layer, leading to a mixing of the colours and colour bleeding. This is part of the Speedpaints formulation. It does happen, but how much of a problem is it? I think the first thing to make clear is if you are going to use these paints as they are intended to be used, as a one-coat painting solution, reactivation isn't an issue at all. Really, you are only going to notice a serious issue if you start trying to layer up paints on top of the Speedpaints, but if you're doing that, why are you using Speedpaints in the first place? Just use regular acrylics and washes. Having said that, reactivation hasn't been a major concern for me yet in anything I have done. In a video the other day, I showed a few Harry Potter miniatures I had been working on. Since I made that video, I have gone back to the troll and dry brushed all over the skin areas with Administratum Grey. It's reduced the blotchiness of the Speedpaint and it didn't cause any issues. I also dry brushed the Dementor with grey and then applied a coat of Hive Dweller purple from the Speedpaints range. This was on top of 2 coats of Grim Black. I didn't notice any problems and the miniature now has a much richer black finish with a purple tone. So there's that. But layering up paints isn't the only concern. I've also seen lots of people saying about needing to varnish the miniatures before handling them a lot because the paint will wear off. And yes, do that, varnish your miniatures. This isn't a new thing, and I'm actually a bit surprised that varnishing miniatures isn't a common thing that everyone is doing. I strongly recommend if you are going to spend any amount of time painting miniatures that you varnish them afterwards. I've varnished everything I've ever painted. It's going to help in a bunch of ways. Obviously, it protects your miniatures during use. If you handle miniatures a lot, over time you will start to wear off the paint, or the oil from your fingers is going to cause some damage. And besides that, whenever you drop a miniature, knock together a few miniatures in transit, accidentally get the limbs of several miniatures tangled up, or cram them into a plastic insert that's too tight, like the new Hero Quest inserts, you are going to be wearing away and chipping at that paintwork you invested your precious time in. If you have a varnish coating, any damage goes on the varnish, not on the paint. The varnish can also prevent the paint from fading. Personally, I use a range of different varnishes, including the brush-on varnishes Storm Shield from Citadel and Anti-Shine from Army Painter. I haven't tried these brush-ons over Speedpaints, and it probably isn't worth the risk just in case. Fortunately, I also have spray varnishes. I always use either Munitorum from Citadel, which has a nice satin type finish, or Anti-Shine from Army Painter, which is a matte finish. Obviously, buying varnishes is an additional expense, but if you're putting time into painting something, I really do think you should be taking the extra step to preserve that effort, whether you are using Speedpaints or not. And of course, if you have varnish in your hobby supplies, painting over Speedpaints becomes even less of an issue. If you have used Speedpaints but then decide you want to do some layering or blending over the top, just lay down a coat of your spray varnish first and then paint over that. The varnish forms a barrier between the paints so you won't reactivate the Speedpaints. But really, honestly, how easy is it to wipe off Speedpaints anyway? In my experience, the paint isn't going to fly off the miniatures as soon as you touch them. I have handled the painted unvarnished miniatures and it isn't like the paint is liquefying and staining my fingers. But just to demonstrate, let's do a little experiment. I have here a base that has been primed with Army Painter paints and then coated with 2 coats of Grim Black Speedpaint. The last coat of paint dried 12 hours ago. First of all, let's see what happens if I lightly brush my fingers over the base. You can see we aren't harming anything. I mean, we would over time, but just like this, no. If I really rub hard, I'm obviously going to wear away the paint much faster, but then that would be true of any paint I put on here and isn't how I would handle any of my miniatures. And you can see, I'm still not getting anything on my hands. But now the real test. Let's put some water on this base. Almost immediately, the paint reactivates. However, getting your fingers really wet and handling a base with the darkest of the Speedpaints on it is pretty extreme. Let's see if we can just apply some regular thinned down matte white paint over a different base. This one was also painted with Grim Black 12 hours ago. You can see that I can apply the white paint and it isn't mixing with the black underneath. There shouldn't be any problems doing a couple of layers to get a nice bright insignia on that base. So yes, I would say that in moderation you can lay down acrylics over the top of speed paints. Your issues are going to arise from trying to do too much layering, wet blending or washes. And there you have it. Take from that what you will, but here's my final thoughts on this subject. Yes, reactivation is a thing to be aware of. It isn't going to cause much of a problem if you want to dry brush over a miniature, or apply a second coat of speed paint, or a few finishing details like buttons on coats. But if you want to do lots of layering, shading and wet blending, speed paints probably aren't something you should be looking at. It's not really what they are for. 2. The longer you leave your speed paints to dry, the less of an issue reactivation becomes. Just don't start painting in the bath. 3. I would probably leave off trying to use water slide transfers over speed paints unless you have varnished the paint first. And 4. Varnish your miniatures. It's totally worth it. But I think that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you've really enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.